Welcome. Our guest on today's program is Miss Patience Eyere Ebini. She is a licensed independent clinical social worker based in the United States of America. She hails from Upper Bayam, Manu Division, Southwest region of Cameroon. I fondly call her Madame Solution because it seems like she has a solution for every problem. Today I put her to the test by raising one of the most challenging problems that we have in today's society, that is parenting, especially parenting of difficult children. We will discuss this phenomenon and find out where we are getting it wrong and what we need to do to get it right. You're welcome to the program, Miss Patience.
Thank you once more.
Parenting is one of the most rewarding jobs, I should say, on planet Earth. But we can say that this lifelong commitment can turn into a nightmare if you are raising or you're parenting a difficult child. But before we get there, I would like us to kind of define the notion of the phenomenon called parenting, which seems very obvious, but it's still very confusing. What is the meaning of parenting?
That's a wonderful question. And parenting basically means caring for a child, raising a child, but it's also a process of being able to provide and support that child in the areas of intellectual growth, physical well-being, emotional support, and just making sure that the child's basic needs are being met from infancy, from birth, all the way to adulthood.
Yeah. Today, it would seem like parenting is becoming more and more challenging than in the past. Actually, we have people who are doing competing parenting. There are those who go in for the old type of parenting, what our parents did to us, how they raised us. And there are other people who will say they prefer the modern day parenting. I don't know what modern day parenting is all about, but you hear people talking every day of modern day parenting, old time parenting. Some even go as far as saying that the Western type of parenting, which is the European type of parenting, is the best. Now, and you have people having this competition between these three different types of parenting. As a social worker, can you tell me if there is an ideal kind of parenting?
So basically, I want to start off by saying that there's no one ideal way of parenting. There is no, what I hear people say, one style fits all kind of parenting. Yeah. But people ideally feel as though there are set norms that as a parent, you have to be a certain type of parent for your child to turn out to be a certain type of child, which quote-unquote community might say or society might say your child is a good child or a bad child. But the truth about that is there's just no one way of being a parent. There are different styles of parenting, which basically just allows you as a parent to choose different ways of how you want to raise your child. And there's no particular way that is much better than the other one, because at different times of a child's developmental age and stages, you have to be adaptive. So the parenting style that you might use for your child when he or she was a year old or within a 1 to 5 year bracket could not be applicable to that child at the age of 12 years old. There's a cultural component to parenting. As continental Africans, the way our parents raised us will be a little different from the way we are today raising our children in the Western world. Because when you look back at the way you and I were raised by our parents, what they did to us at that time could have been considered appropriate given the nature of the culture that we grow up from. Now in the Western world, there are things that you might look into and say it's not appropriate, but that's where the cultural difference lies in. But let me say also that culture evolves. Social norms evolve. So the bottom line is parenting has to evolve to be able to accommodate these children in whatever context of the world that they live in. Because what you're looking at as different components in the parenting styles that our parents utilized to raise us. Some of those components were good. Some maybe not so good. But it was working. It was working. Now there's some components about how we are raising our modern children today that may not be the best, but it's absolutely absolutely not the worst type of parenting. So there are some components in the way that we were raised and the ways that we are raising our children that could be considered appropriate, as long as you put that within a fine parameters of how do you merge the two, by picking what was so good in the old ways and picking what is so good in the modern ways and putting that together. But you cannot undermine the social changes that are coming up, and children are being exposed to these things through the media, through peer pressure, through a lot of other things that did not exist in the past. So those things are impacting different ways that we parent our children today. One of the things that I wanted to also point out is that as parents, regardless of the cultures that we come from, every culture wants to see the best out of their children. That we can at least agree, whether it's Western or African culture.
Yes.
Now, the expectations that we put on the children as far as how we want to parent them, the expectations may be a little different, but for the most part is the same. So I want to talk about what you call difficult children. The truth about that, and research has proven that difficult children really has nothing to do with parenting. Which, by that I mean, the way you parent your child does not determine if that child is going to turn into a difficult child or a soft-spoken child. So basically, children are born with their own temperaments. When we talk about children being difficult, what we're actually talking about is a child who's born with a strong will. And when you talk about will or willpower or the temperament of somebody, it's innate, it's biological. But what we see as parents or human beings in that child is what translates into their behavior. And what we as parents respond to, we're responding to the behaviors that we are seeing.
Yeah.
We're not looking into that child about what is it that is going on with the child, which is translating into what we're seeing through the behaviors. So what we actually talk about difficult children, what we're actually talking about is a child with a difficult temperament.
After all is said and done, there are instances that this child that you love so much, that you do everything to please, that you raise properly, still drives you crazy. And this is when you start thinking of two options. The first is setting rules and the next is punishment. Before we get to the second option, let's talk a little bit about the first option, which is setting rules. It would, I have this, or I and many other people, we have this problem of setting rules. It would seem like a lot of parents don't want to set rules, and even when they do, they don't keep to those rules. They're kind of, as we say, permissive. Now, what is it that parents need to do when it comes to setting rules and keeping it?
As a young parent that I was myself, I had a lot of difficulties with setting rules for my child. But this is something that a lot of parents struggle with. And it's either they are setting rules and not being consistent with the rules themselves in terms of implementing the rules, or they're not even setting rules at all. So you have these people who don't even set the rules, and then you have the parents who set the rules, and then they themselves, not the kids, they themselves break the rules, and then they hold the kids responsible. Then you have the parents who actually set rules, and then they change the rules every time the child breaks the rules. So this is what it looks like in practical terms. You set a rule that a child doesn't talk back to you. You say something, the child talks back to you. You punish the child. And then the next day, the child talks back, and you don't do anything about it. What the message that you're giving that child is that there are times when I can do it and get punished or disciplined, and there are times when I can do it and I can get away with it. That is inconsistent. You're giving that child mixed messages. And what kids normally do is they do the things that they can get away with. So the worst thing you could do to a child as a parent, one of the worst things, is setting rules and not being consistent with implementing the rules or implementing consistent consequences for the rules. Because the truth and the bottom line is, You cannot raise a child without having clear boundaries. And those boundaries and rules and regulations, whatever you want to call them, based assigning chores, letting them know you need to be respectful, you need to be polite to people. When you set those rules, it has to be communicated to the child. It's a conversation. It's not just me saying because you broke the rule today, that's when you find out that there was a rule in the house. Sometimes people feel as though when I make rules for my kids and then I discipline them for breaking the rules, and I feel it makes me feel bad because I love my child so much and I don't want them to feel like I'm punishing them or I'm being too hard on them, then I have to change the rule. What you're doing to that child is a huge disservice, because part of parenting is being consistent. I can tell you firsthand that the most difficult aspect of parenting is being consistent. If we as parents can just understand that when you make a rule, it's for the best interest of that child, and just let the child accept the rule and understand why that rule is there and implement the rule consistently. Right. Don't flip-flop. In Africa, they have this adage where people say, spare the rod and spoil the child, right? So we typically believe in spanking a child. Even in America, people spank their kids. And when you come to America, you hear parents say, oh, for this country, they need to beat Pikinu, because if you beat Pikin, then the police can't catch you. That's a myth. The law in America allows you to physically discipline your child. As a social worker, that's what I do every day. And I do educate parents on that. But this is what the law does not allow you to do. And that's where our parents get it wrong. Typically, African parents that migrate to the US, they get it wrong because they just come in and they hear it from somewhere, somebody told them, not be that Pikino, because they'll call you police. The law allows you to discipline your child in America, and you have the right to use physical discipline. But what the law does not allow you to do is, do not be excessive in the amount of force that you use in physically disciplining that child. And what the parameters of the law allows you to do is to use an open hand. The force does not have to be excessive. And even in doing that, you don't have to leave a mark or any form of injuries as a result of spanking the child. But if you leave a mark that goes away within 24 hours, then it's considered transient in nature, which basically is just saying the amount of force that was used wasn't too much. So even if there was fingerprints, it went away, so it wasn't too much force. So it's a myth when people say you cannot spank your child, and they have that in their heads. But going back to, is spanking the best answer? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In the US, parents use extension cords, what they call electrical cords, right? They use all forms of objects to discipline. And I point this out because this is not something that is only unique to the African society or typical continental Africa. We see it here in the USA. Americans, Latino, Caucasians, Africans, they do it too. But that is where the government steps in to say, yes, I understand this is your family and this is your child, but somebody needs to be able to step in and say, we're going to protect this child from what clearly goes beyond the boundaries of physical discipline and spanking. Because that's where it calls the parent to order. To say, yes, you can discipline your child physically, but what you are doing right now is clearly abusive to that child, and it may have some potential impact and damage to the child's well-being. And that's where I think as Africans, as Cameroonians, talking about parenting, we need to start understanding that there's some forms of discipline that our culture, our society embraced, and it may be okay for us, but it could be clearly perceived as abusive to the child. And as an African, I love being an African mother. I was raised in Cameroon. I grew up in Cameroon. I was raised in the village. My dad worked in city, so I have a combination of that. I can clearly tell you as a social worker today and living in the US, that when I look back at some of the kids that go through what quote unquote in Cameroon is called physical discipline, I say to myself every day, how do I educate some parents to understand that physical discipline, spanking is okay, but some of the ways that we do it is clearly abusive to our kids and we need to stop.
Is there an age where you have to start spanking a child?
Is it okay for a parent to spank a child at 17 years old, at 18, at 15, at 12, at 1?
6 months.
Or 6 months old, right? Mm-hmm. It's clearly not. But do we do it? We do, right? Because we can do it as parents. But this is why I say it's not. Because even when you set rules and expectations for your child, or when you set boundaries, or you're trying to discipline a child, it has to be age appropriate. Let's look at this in this context. If you have a 2-year-old and you're trying to set a rule in the home for that child, and you set a rule that says that your rule in this house as a 2-year-old is that you're going to be washing the dishes every day.
Doesn't work.
It's not practically possible. But in your head, you say, I want to train my child early on. But the truth about it is, the age is not appropriate for that child to be able to wash their own dish. When you look at a 2-year-old child at the stage of their development, you're not only looking at their physical size in terms of development, you're looking at their brain functioning, how their brain is wired, how do they think, how do they look at things, what is their understanding about their behaviors, right? Mm-hmm. So when a 2-year-old child whom, if you read about child development, you would hear like they typically say that the bad 2. Mm-hmm. That's when they have the worst tantrums, the temper tantrums. Everything that comes out of their mouth is no, because that's all they think in their heads, right? When a child at 2 years old throws a temper tantrum in front of your guests, as a parent, the typical African parent that we are, what are we thinking about?
Spanking.
Walk off with that place because if you know I will beat you right now.
Mm-hmm.
You expect that 2-year-old to understand immediately that they need to get up.
Yeah.
What you're failing to understand at that point as a parent is that child is 2 years old. Your brain at that point is telling them that that's what you do. Right? Mm-hmm. But we don't see that. What you as a parent needs to start doing at that early age, as difficult as it may sound, that's when you start communicating with that child and processing their behaviors. It's difficult for us to do as African parents, and not only African parents, parents generally, even in the United States. When I sit today as an adult and look back, to really look at times when my parent, my mom or my dad ever sat me down to say, look, I understand that you were angry because maybe I told you to go into the kitchen and give me a glass of water and you didn't want to do it. But I need to know why you think you don't have to do that. And just process that with me to see what's going on. I can't really see that. But let me tell you what I see up front. I told you to go into that kitchen and get me a glass of water, and you have the audacity to tell me that who are you not to go? And by the time that question is almost at the end, there's a slap across your face.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what that does to a child.
Yeah.
You never know whether you were wrong. You never know what you did right. And the thing about our African parents is that when you do something right, they don't tell you you did something right.
Yeah.
The feedback that you always get, and with a slap or a beating, is when you do something wrong. But even as an adult, don't you think that any human being, regardless of their ages, need to be able to understand that I did something wrong?
So it's about communication.
It's about teaching, and in that process, you're teaching the child also how to communicate when they are angry about something.
Agree. Now, we are looking at circumstances where this is good news for those who just had their baby, or those who had just their baby is turning 2 or 3. This is good news. How about those who are now stuck with a difficult child of 15, of 18? How will you, talking about, because as you said, the foundation is not there. They didn't build the fundamentals. They didn't put together the fundamentals. But now they're stuck, and we still need to help them. Right. So what will you advise these parents in terms of rules and in terms of punishment?
Okay. So remember when we started talking, you talked about what is parenting. And one of the things that I pointed out is that parenting is a process. So when you point out that your child is now 15 years old, 17, and they're stuck in this difficult behavior, maybe if we caught it earlier on and start working, it probably would have been a little better and easier. But even at 17, because it's a process, we still cannot stop, right?
Yeah.
Some of the things that we can still do is that process needs to start wherever that child is stuck in your development.
Yeah.
So basically this is what it looks like. It may sound easy, it may look easy, but it's often not easy for parents who are those typical rigid parents. It's typical. So what I'm going to suggest is this. You can get up one morning. It's the basic stuff that we don't think about. There are parents who never say good morning to their kids. There are parents who expect your kids to be the ones to always tell them, Mommy morning, Mommy afternoon, Mommy. They never can see their kid in the morning and just go to that kid and give them a nice little hug and say, how you sleep for nights? That can start off a conversation as basic as that. It could also be something like what you just did to me right now by inviting me here and say, Patience, I want to have a conversation with you about parenting. It could be breaking a norm and starting a new routine with that child, whereby you're just basically saying, oh, today is Saturday. Maybe I think you'll take the biggest go cinema. Right? Or just say, hey, today I want us to go to a restaurant and just eat. I'm not going to cook today at home. Yeah. You do those little icebreakers that you're setting a stage for the bigger conversation to start.
And it's not only for the modern parents.
And it's not threatening, very non-threatening.
In the village, it could be like, you and I, we're going to go to the farm, just the two of us. We're just going to do the gardening, the two of us.
And the child may be like, why me I get for go for farm with you today? No, we don't always go your farm. So you're going to have to play a little differently. Yeah. The rules of the game have to be a little softer and much more less threatening to the child.
Now, quickly, can you give us, a general advice to parents? Like, quickly, the do's and don'ts of parenting and the general advice that you can give to African parents to say, this is what you really need to do, like midway, to guarantee a 40 to 50% chance of succeeding as a parent or to be a great parent.
And I'm going to say this, it's not going to be personal, but I'm going to say this, backing it up with personal experience and having the blessing of being raised in a typical African society and then growing up my little adult life in the Western world. And not only that, my profession as a clinical social worker and working for so many years with abused children or neglected children, I could clearly tell you that there's something that works for all children. And the least you can do as a parent is at least try to do those things. One of them is, again, being a consistent, loving parent. Be a consistent, nurturing parent. Be a parent who sets clear boundaries. Implement them with love and instilling in the children a sense of responsibility by teaching them why I'm doing this, why I'm giving these rules, why I'm punishing you, like you say, why I'm disciplining you this way or that way. Be consistent in everything you do for the kids. Put the interest of the children first. But the key thing for our African parents, please communicate with your children. Teach them how to communicate with you. Let them feel comfortable with you. The parents should stop creating a home environment where children don't look at it like a safe place for them. Not because they're being harmed. But let me say this. How many times have you been in a home and a parent is leaving work, coming home in the evening, and it's, as soon as they park their car, everybody takes off from the living room? The contrary has to happen, right? When mom is coming home, the kids have to be here to welcome and give them hugs. That's what is critical to us. We need a communication line between the parents and their kids.
It's on that positive note that we take leave of you, Miss Patience. It was wonderful having you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.